Who is Jesus? I mean, for centuries, that question has been at the very heart of two of the world's biggest religions. But what if the answers we all think we know aren't, well, the whole story? Today, we're going to dig into the arguments from John Cantillo's book, Who is Jesus? Because he proposes a discovery that's pretty surprising, to say the least. So right off the bat, we're hit with this massive problem. You've got the Bible, which is commonly understood to say Jesus is God, the Son of God, and was crucified. And then you have the Quran, which seems to say the complete opposite. Nope, he's not God, not the Son of God, and he wasn't crucified. I mean, those are total contradictions. And this disagreement has been, a huge point of division for a long, long time. So the big question the author asks is it even possible for both of these sacred texts to be correct? It sounds impossible, right? But the whole argument hangs on taking a fresh look at translation and historical context. Okay, let's start with the first big sticking point, the crucifixion. So, was Jesus crucified? We all know the biblical story, but the Quran seems to tell a totally different tale. And here's the verse that seems to just end the debate. The standard reading is, a direct denial of the crucifixion. The idea is that maybe someone else, a substitute, was on the cross. But the author says, hang on, we need to look closer at the actual words and the world they were spoken into. So the author's whole method is about stepping back in time, because to really get what the text is saying, you have to get the context. This verse isn't just a random statement, it's a response to something very specific that was happening at the time. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. The verse actually starts with the words, and their boast. What boast? Well, back in Mecca at that time, certain groups were apparently boasting, bragging, that they were the ones who had killed Jesus, the guy the Christians called their God. So the argument is, this verse isn't denying that the crucifixion happened, not at all. It's refuting their specific boast, the claim that they did it. And that's the whole key right there. When you reframe the verse as a response to that specific brag, the contradiction just vanishes. According to this analysis, both the Bible and the Quran can be seen as agreeing that, the crucifixion absolutely did happen. All right, so if the crucifixion isn't a contradiction, what about the next big one? The title, Son of God. It's totally central to Christianity, but Islam explicitly rejects it. This seems, again, like a problem you just can't solve. And here's the text from the Quran. It couldn't be clearer. God does not have a son. So, how in the world could the Bible's constant use of the title Son of God ever line up with this? Well, the author argues it all comes down to what we mean by one specific word. And that word, which you see in a lot of older Bible translations, is beget. As you can see, the definition is purely biological. It means a physical, reproductive act. And this is the key that unlocks the whole thing. And this just lays it out perfectly. The Quran is rejecting the old pagan idea of gods having biological kids through sex. And the Bible, by describing the virgin conception, also makes it crystal clear this was supernatural, not biological. So the author's conclusion? Both texts agree. Jesus is the Son of God, just not in a physical, reproductive way. Okay, so now we get to the biggest question of all. And this is where the author claims a simple mistranslation literally changed history. Is Jesus the same being as God? First, the author points to places where Jesus himself seems to draw a line in the sand. Right here, when someone calls him good teacher, Jesus seems to correct him, separating himself from the unique goodness of God. And you see it again here. The argument is that statements like this show Jesus as a separate being, operating in submission to the Father. Okay, but if that's true, how do we explain the most famous verse of all, the one used to prove he is God? This verse, John 1:1. It's the absolute cornerstone of the doctrine that Jesus is God, and the Word was God. Seems pretty open and shut, right? Well, the author says, not so fast. When you look at the original Greek, a totally different picture starts to emerge. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really cool, especially if you're into language. In the original Greek, the first time it says God, it says kotian, which literally means the God, with that definite article, the. But the second time talking about the word, it just says theos, no the. The author argues this isn't an accident, it's a critical distinction. And a more accurate translation would be the word was a God, which elevates Jesus for sure, but doesn't make him the same being as the God. So if the original text makes this distinction, where did the whole idea of the Trinity come from? Well, according to the author, you have to jump forward a few hundred years after Jesus. And the story starts with an early church father named Tertullian, whose thinking was shaped by a really surprising source, a non-religious philosophy called materialism. You see, Tertullian, as a materialist, basically thought that everything, even God, had to be made of physical stuff. So he reasoned that Jesus must be made from a literal chunk of God's physical substance. This idea, which, by the way, directly contradicts what Jesus himself said, that God is spirit, this became the philosophical seed, according to the author, that grew into the Trinity doctrine. And that leads us to this incredible conclusion from the author. The doctrine of the Holy Trinity wasn't something taken directly from the original Bible. It was founded centuries later, in the 4th century, on what's argued to be a flawed philosophical idea, which means that the Bible's original text and the Quran are actually in agreement. Jesus is not the same being as God. So, let's just pull all this together. By going back and looking at the history, the real meaning of key words, and what the author calls these critical translation mistakes, a completely different picture of Jesus starts to take shape. And it's one that shows a shocking amount of consistency between the Bible and the Quran. This is it. This is the book's final thesis. Once you peel back all those layers of later interpretation, the core story is the same. The contradictions that seemed impossible to solve, they disappear. And you're left with one account where Jesus is the Son of God, but not in a biological sense, who is crucified, but who is not the same being as the one singular God. I mean, this whole analysis really challenges some long-held beliefs, arguing that context and translation are absolutely everything. And it leaves you with this really provocative thought. If we applied this same critical lens to other ancient texts, other historical events, what else might we discover if we were just willing to look again?